All right, so let's dive into a question that's kind of fun, but also pretty mind-boggling. How do you figure out who is the greatest artist of all time? You've given us some great sources this time around. And looks like we'll be focusing on music for this deep dive. We've been talking names like the Beatles, Michael Jackson, Beyonce, artists that I think pretty much everyone knows, at least the names. But what we're going to do today is go a little deeper, go beyond just recognizing the names and really try to unpack what makes these artists so great.
I think what's really interesting here is that the whole idea of greatest is subjective, right?
Hmm.
It really depends on what you value in art. But the good news is the source material actually gives us some criteria to think about. Things like influence, technical skill, cultural impact. All these things can help us kind of measure artistic greatness, at least in a way that feels a bit more objective.
I love that. So we've got these measuring sticks, but how do we actually use them? Like, what does it actually mean for an artist to have influence? What are we really looking at when we're talking about that?
Well, you can think of influence as kind of changing the game. It's
Mhm.
about leaving a mark that is so significant that other artists are inspired by it.
Yeah.
And even, maybe they create whole new genres or movements because of that initial spark.
Okay, so influencing the direction of music itself. Gotcha. What about technical skill? Is it just about raw talent or is there something more to it?
Well, it is definitely about raw talent, but
Yeah.
it's also about pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Within your chosen art form, like, are they a virtuoso on an instrument? Do they have this, like, otherworldly vocal range? It's about mastery, but it's also about innovation.
Yeah.
So not just being great,
Yeah.
but doing something new with that greatness.
Right.
Now, there's also cultural impact. What does that even mean? For an artist to have an impact that goes beyond just like the stage or the studio, well, it's about reaching into society and affecting it in a much broader sense. You think about music that inspires social change or influences fashion trends, maybe even shapes the way an entire generation sees the world. It's about their work becoming so intertwined with the culture that you can't really separate the two.
That's a really powerful concept. Like the artist becomes this mirror reflecting and maybe even shaping the world around them. Now, the source material digs into some specific examples, and it starts things off with a band that, well, needs no introduction. The Beatles. Have you ever thought about how different music might be without their influence?
It's pretty hard to imagine. The text really lays out their achievements,
Yeah.
revolutionizing music, pioneering new recording techniques, songwriting that's still studied today. I mean, their influence is still felt decades later. But what's really fascinating is how they achieve that impact.
Yeah, the source mentions how the Beatles completely transformed like the whole music landscape. What were some of the key ways they actually did that?
Well, they were pioneers in the studio. They weren't afraid to experiment, like using multi-tracking, incorporating all these unconventional sounds, backwards recording, and bringing in instruments from different cultures. And all these techniques, they became this blueprint for so many artists that came after them.
It's like they expanded the vocabulary of music itself. And on top of that, they didn't shy away from tackling like social and political themes in their lyrics, which was pretty groundbreaking for the time.
Absolutely. They weren't just entertainers. They were using their platform to engage with the world. And that connection, combined with their musical innovation, I think is a huge part of why their impact was so profound.
And speaking of impact, the source material then moves on to another icon, someone who redefined what a pop star could be, Michael Jackson. It talks about how he revolutionized music videos, created these legendary performances, and basically wrote the book on like modern pop music. What stands out to you about his influence?
Well, I think Jackson took what the Beatles did with studio innovation and brought it to this whole visual realm. You think about the groundbreaking techniques in Thriller or Billie Jean. Those videos weren't just promotional tools, they were artistic statements. They pushed the boundaries of storytelling and visual effects. And MTV, which was still kind of new at the time, well, it gave him this platform to reach a global audience unlike anything before.
So he wasn't just changing the music, but also how we experience it, like a whole new level of performance and artistry.
Exactly. And you can't talk about Michael Jackson without acknowledging his stage presence. I mean, his performances were legendary. The moonwalk, the anti-gravity lean, the sheer energy. He set a whole new standard for what a live performance could be.
It's like he understood the power of spectacle and how to make it part of the music. And the text also mentions another pivotal figure, someone who, well, maybe didn't invent a genre, but definitely redefined it, Elvis Presley. It talks about his massive cultural influence and how he changed like the whole landscape of rock and roll.
Elvis is a great example of how an artist can be incredibly influential, even if they weren't the original creator of a certain style. He took those rhythm and blues roots and brought them to this massive audience, and he fused them with country and pop sensibilities to create something that was totally new and electrifying.
The source specifically mentions his impact on like youth culture. It's like he became the voice of a generation that was looking for something to express their energy and, maybe even a little rebellion.
Exactly. Elvis challenged those societal norms with his music, his performances, and he became this symbol of youthful rebellion. And his impact went way beyond the music. His style, his dance moves, his attitude, it all contributed to this huge cultural shift that was felt all over the world.
It's pretty amazing how some artists become so like intertwined with the culture of their time. And the source material brings up a couple more people who've definitely had that kind of impact. Stevie Wonder and Beyoncé. I'm a huge Stevie Wonder fan myself. What do you think it is about his music that just keeps resonating with people, even like decades later?
I think Stevie Wonder's just a musical genius, plain and simple. The text highlights his songwriting, of course, and the way he blended genres so seamlessly, bringing in elements of funk, soul, pop, jazz into this totally unique sound. It also mentions how he used instruments in a new way, especially like synthesizers, which really added a whole new dimension to his music.
I've always been struck by like the emotional depth of his songs. There's a sense of both joy and vulnerability there, and it always feels so authentic.
And he didn't shy away from complex social issues in his lyrics either. Songs like Living for the City and Higher Ground, they really reflected the struggles and hopes of the African American community at the time. And they still hold so much relevance today.
And speaking of artists who use their platform to address social issues, the source material also points to Beyoncé, who's really pushing boundaries in music and performance in a whole new way. What do you think it is about her work that makes her such a force in music today?
I think Beyoncé is just a master of visual storytelling. She's taken music videos to like a whole other level, creating these elaborate mini films that are as much about artistry and social commentary as they are about promoting her music.
And she's really smart about how she uses technology and social media to connect with her fans in a really direct way.
Yeah, absolutely. She understands how to use those platforms to control her own narrative and to create that sense of intimacy with her audience. And she's not afraid to take risks and challenge expectations. Her performances are incredible, with amazing choreography, elaborate costumes, and just the sheer power of her stage presence.
Now, the source material takes an interesting turn at this point. It goes into this comparison that's sure to spark some debate, Michael Jackson versus Drake. It even says that comparing artists from different eras is like tricky because the music industry changes so much over time, as does technology and just how people consume music. It's almost like comparing apples and oranges.
It is a complex comparison, for sure, but I think it's a valuable one because it makes us really think about what we value in an artist and how those values might change depending on the context. For Jackson, the source material highlights his impact, which is just unmatched, those legendary performances we talked about earlier, and his ability to make music that transcends time and cultures. What do you think is at the heart of his enduring appeal?
I think it's his ability to connect with people on this like emotional level. His music has this universal quality to it. It speaks to something deep inside us, I think, no matter what language you speak or where you come from. And his performances were just electric. He was a true showman who knew how to captivate an audience.
And he had this incredible work ethic and this real dedication to his craft that you could just see in everything he did. He was constantly pushing himself creatively,
Yeah.
experimenting with new sounds, new technology, always striving for perfection in his performances.
And then on the other side of this comparison, we have Drake. The source material points to how he's like mastered the modern music industry, especially in the age of streaming. It highlights his consistent hits, the connection he's built with his audience, and his ability to just adapt to all these constantly changing trends. What's your take on how he navigates the music world today?
Well, I think Drake really understands the modern music landscape. He's embraced streaming platforms and social media, and he uses them to connect with fans in a way that feels both authentic and strategic. He's also incredibly versatile, collaborating with artists from different genres and always evolving his sound to stay ahead of the curve.
He's often credited with pioneering a whole new sound, like this atmospheric, introspective kind of hip hop that's really resonated with a huge audience. But some critics say that his reliance on streaming platforms and his focus on creating viral moments, that it kind of diminishes the artistic value of his work. What do you think about that perspective?
It's an interesting critique for sure, and I think it speaks to how the digital age has changed how we consume music. and how we evaluate it. There's no doubt that streaming has changed the music industry, and artists like Drake have definitely benefited from those changes. But you have to acknowledge that he is a talented songwriter and performer. His music connects with millions of people, and that shouldn't be dismissed.
It really raises some questions about how we define artistic merit in this digital age. Is it about creating work that stands the test of time? Or is it about capturing the current moment and connecting with a massive audience right now?
It's a debate that's likely to continue as technology and the music industry keep evolving. But it's an important discussion because it forces us to really examine our own assumptions about what makes art great.
So the source material doesn't shy away from weighing in on this debate, huh?
It definitely doesn't. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. We're not just, laying out facts. We're grappling with these subjective questions, using these artists as case studies.
Totally. So what's the source's verdict?
It says, and I'm quoting here, "If forced to choose, I would lean towards Michael Jackson as the best artist."
Okay, so a slight edge to Jackson,
Hmm.
but the source makes it clear that this isn't some, absolute truth.
Right. It really emphasizes that this is a subjective question and that Drake is an amazing artist in his own right. It even goes on to say that comparing artists across different eras is inherently difficult because the context is just so different. It's not about saying one is definitively better than the other, but about appreciating their unique strengths and how they each changed music.
That's a great point. It's about recognizing those nuances and acknowledging all the different things that contribute to an artist's impact and legacy. So, knowing all of this now, and keeping in mind that it is subjective, where do you land on this debate? Who would you say takes the crown, based on everything we've talked about from the source material?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think the source material gives us a really helpful framework. It goes beyond personal taste and encourages us to look at the bigger picture, the impact, the influence, the innovation. Those are the things that define artistic greatness.
And those qualities can be found in artists across all genres and time periods. It's not just limited to music either. Have you ever thought about how this question of greatest artists might apply to other art forms, like visual art, literature, or film?
That's a great point. The criteria we've been talking about could definitely be applied to those fields too. You think about Picasso's impact on modern art, Shakespeare's influence on literature, or how filmmakers like Spielberg have shaped cinema. It's definitely a fascinating question to think about.
It is. So, to everyone listening, we're throwing the question to you. Think about those other artistic fields: visual art, literature, film. Who would you nominate as the greatest in those fields, and what criteria would you use to make that judgment?
It's a question worth considering. Because in the end, the best artist is the one who speaks to you the most powerfully.
Well said. And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive. But I think the exploration doesn't have to stop here, right?
Right.
We started off trying to answer this question of who's the greatest. But I feel like we've kind of uncovered something much bigger along the way. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really about the power of art itself. The ability to connect with people, to transcend boundaries, and to leave a mark on culture that lasts for years and years.
I love that. Whether it's the Beatles changing the sound of music forever, or Michael Jackson redefining what it means to be a pop icon, or even Drake kind of mastering this whole digital age. Each artist brings something unique to the table. And what's interesting to me is that we can appreciate what each artist brings, even artists from completely different times and genres, without needing to say, okay, this one is the absolute greatest. It's not really a competition, is it?
No, not at all.
It's more like a journey through this amazing world of creative expression.
And that journey is really personal. Like we said before, the greatest artist is the one who speaks to you, the one who moves you, inspires you. It's the music that makes you want to dance, the lyrics that make you think. It's the art that just takes your breath away. And that's going to be different for everyone.
So to everyone listening, keep exploring. Don't be afraid to try new things, discover new artists, and let your own idea of what's great evolve over time. What you connected with 10 years ago might feel different now. And that's okay.
Yeah, the world of art is full of possibilities. There's always something new to discover, something to challenge you, something to inspire you, maybe even inspire you to create something great yourself.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Keep listening, keep discovering, and keep those conversations about art going. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of knowledge and ideas.